This video introduces inclusions. Inclusions are sets of web pages created from a user journey that can be used in other user journeys. The benefit of this is that if many of your user journeys share a common set of pages, for example they visit the home page and then they log on to your application, you only need to configure these pages once and then you can use them in as many user journeys as you wish. Inclusions also help in the agile world or when maintaining user journeys. When one or more pages change between performance tests, you simply record the new pages, convert them to an inclusion, and then use this new inclusion within your existing user journeys, which will now run correctly. This will significantly reduce the time to maintain user journeys and is why inclusions make StressTester appropriate for agile development projects. Okay, so let's look at inclusions in action. If we look at this browse and buy user journey, we can see it's been completely configured. The icons after the step groups show us that validation criteria, dynamic data, dynamic content and other features have been deployed, so this user journey is ready to be used in a performance test. One of the pages, the logon page, is probably going to be used within many user journeys. If we look at the logon page, we can see that dynamic data has been configured for the username and the password, so that we can vary the user that logs onto the system. Success validation is specified to handle the situation where logon succeeds or handle the situation where the username and password is invalid, and flow control has been configured so that depending on the response from the logon, i.e. it's successful or it's not, StressTester flows to the correct next step. Okay, having configured the login step so it works correctly, is validating and flows depending on the response from the application, how do we use it within another user journey? Within StressTester I have the change user details user journey that has been recorded but is yet to be configured. This user journey also contains the login step, but if we look at it we can see the username and password are the same that were entered at record time, i.e. the literals I used during the recording, no success validation specified, and no flow control has been specified either. So how do we create an inclusion from the login step we have configured so we can use it within the change user details user journey? An inclusion can be created from one or more step groups, so I select the step groups of interest. This time I'm only going to select the login step group. I right click and convert to inclusion. I have to give the inclusion a name and optionally I can give it a description. When I click convert, the selected step groups are replaced by an include step, which is indicated by an arrow. Selecting the include step shows the fields that I can set. I can set a sleep time before the inclusion is run, and as with any other step group, I can decide that the inclusion runs only during the first cycle for each simulated user or only during the last cycle. If I want to look at the inclusion, I open the inclusions node and I can see all the inclusions for the application. Currently I only have the logon inclusion. Looking at that allows me to see the login page, and as the page uses dynamic data, I can look at the dynamic data variables that have automatically been copied across from the user journey. This means this inclusion can now be included into any other user journey for the application and works immediately. Okay, let's use the inclusion within the change user details user journey. First thing I need to do is to identify the step groups I wish to replace, in this case the login step, and then I want to delete it from the recorded user journey. To do this, I revert it to single steps, select all the steps, and click delete. Now I need to select the step group after which I want to insert the inclusion, in this case the home page, and I right click, choose to insert to step, and then insert an include step. This presents the include step screen where I can give the include step a name. I can specify a sleep time that occurs before the inclusion is run, and as with any type of step, I can choose that it runs only on the first cycle for the simulated user or only on the last cycle. Next I select the inclusion I want to insert. I only have one, the login. And the last thing to consider is the case where the inclusion contains dynamic data items that also already exist within the user journey. They might exist within the user journey itself or within another inclusion that's already been included within the user journey. If I wish this inclusion's dynamic data to override all other similar configurations, I select the checkbox, otherwise I leave it unselected. In the case where there is dynamic data collisions between inclusions or between inclusions and the user journey, StressTester will either look for the inclusion that has been set to take precedence, or otherwise will use the first occurrence of a dynamic data, whether it's within an inclusion or the user journey itself, as the one that runs for the whole of the user journey. When I've configured the include step, I click save, and you can see that the include step has been inserted into the user journey and denoted with the purple arrow. So let's test the inclusion works. The easiest way is to quick run the user journey. So I'll give it a name, test the inclusion, and click start test. This transfers me to the Analyze Results workspace. What I'm really looking at here is the thumbnails that are being returned on the right hand side to check that I can see that the user has actually logged on successfully. The test finished very quickly. When I look at the change details page that can only be obtained if I've logged onto the system, I can see everything's worked successfully.